Hi, I'm Whitney Espich, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alex Amouyel, Executive Director of MIT Solve, and I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. Welcome to the MIT Forum for Equity. So first, a little bit about me. Solve is an initiative of MIT, and our mission is to drive innovation to solve world challenges. And through these challenges, we find incredible tech-based social entrepreneurs all around the world, and we bring MIT's innovation ecosystem and a community of members to help drive lasting transformational impact. And I'm really happy to say that at Solve, 52% of our Solver teams are women-led. And this is the broader point of today's discussion. We know firsthand that if you want to improve the world, you need to support women leaders and entrepreneurs. And that is one of the reasons I'm so honored to be here today with all of you, speaking with Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. Today's forum is sponsored in part by the MIT Federal Credit Union, MIT Professional Education, the MIT Mind, Heart and Hand Community Innovation Fund, the Association of MIT Alumni, the MIT Department of Urban Studies and Planning, and MIT Press. Wow, lots of people coming together for this. And we welcome audience questions and input during the discussion. For those of you joining today, please use the Q&A feature found below the live stream to ask questions of our guest, and I'll get to as many questions as I can. So please keep them coming. So a little bit about Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala today. She's the newly appointed Director General of the World Trade Organization. And on behalf of the entire MIT community, we congratulate you on your appointment. Bravo.
Thank you.
And if Dr. Okonjo-Iweala's name is new to some of you, I will summarize briefly her incredible career to date. She earned her PhD in Regional Economics and Development from MIT in 1982, and then she joined the World Bank as a development economist, eventually rising to managing director, one of the most senior roles. More recently, she served as Nigeria's finance minister and then foreign minister. She returned to her country. And in 2016, she joined Gavi, which is the Global Alliance for Vaccines Innovation, as its board chair. On March, and she's been busy, as you can imagine, when it relates to vaccines and COVID. And then on March 1 of this year, she became, after an election and appointment, she became the Director General of the World Trade Organization, and that begins a 4-year term. She's the first woman and the first African to serve as Director General of this multilateral institution. And so today she's here partly to talk about some of this, but especially to talk about her new book, which is out with MIT Press. It's called Women in Leadership, Real Lives, Real Lessons. It's co-written with another incredible woman leader, Julia Gillard, who's the former Prime Minister of Australia. And it's published by MIT Press, which is fantastic. So I'm going to call you Ngozi, as we discussed that earlier. And so welcome, Ngozi. And please start by giving us an overview of this book, why you wrote it, what the reception so far. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you so much, Alex. And I must say, it's such a pleasure to be back with the MIT community. I have only very fond memories of my time as a graduate student at MIT. I remember how well I was treated as a foreign student. Because of that, I have a really soft spot. And also I've been keeping in touch, working with Solve, being on a committee with the energy group. So doing lots of things. I've come back a few times, so it's nice to be back with you. So this book, Women and Leadership, Real Lives, Real Lessons, that Alex showed you, I often wonder, how did we even finish writing this book with Julia? because we're both doing full-time, more than full-time work whilst we were writing it. But I think it was a bit of a labor of love. And for me, it was a bit of a self-defense. And I'll explain why in a minute. We really wrote this book because we for women who are either moving up, who are already in leadership positions, aspiring to be or moving up in leadership. You know, just to let them know that to help them put their leadership experience in a broader context, to let them know that they are not alone, that even women at the top don't have all the answers. They haven't figured it all out. They are still having experiences that make them smile, cry, laugh sometimes as women. And what we were trying to do is capture these experiences, not so much as a guide of how to avoid or do anything, but as knowledge. If you're going to be a leader, here are some of the things you might expect. You know, and here is how other women in very senior positions dealt with them. We interviewed all these women, presidents, prime ministers, and very well-known women in order to capture this experience. And why did we do this? I think, you know, a few years ago, there was a time when women's leaders seemed to be having a lot of problems. You know, you had Madam Park in Korea who got into trouble. You had Dilma Rousseff in Brazil, who seemed to get into trouble. You had Hillary Clinton. So much was happening to women. And we started wondering, what is it? You know, why are these women having all these problems? And we were relating to some of what seemed to be the experience ourselves. Julia having been the first woman deputy prime minister and then the first woman prime minister in Australia, the 27th prime minister. Myself having been the first female minister of finance in my country and the longest serving one after 2 terms, 7 years, and first female foreign minister. And we encountered quite a few challenges. And when we started exchanging experiences on the sidelines of meetings, as Alex said, I was chair of the board of Gavi, and Julia was chair of the board of the Global Partnership for Education. So we used to end up in the same meetings on the sidelines of the UN somewhere. So we got talking. And when we started looking at these other women, exchanging experiences, then pretty soon we're coming up with hypotheses. Why is this happening to these women? What is the experience? And we decided, well, maybe we should capture it and write it down. Maybe it will be useful for others. For me, in addition to that, and I really miss Julia because we usually do this together. But for me, you know, a lot of women ask me for advice, for counseling, and a lot of women of color also don't have enough of that kind of mentorship. And so I found myself in a situation where I was mentoring very many people. And you know, you can only, I take it seriously, and you can only do so many people and no more. So I decided in self-defense, maybe I should also capture it in this book so people can take away the book and read it, both men and women, and then I don't have to mentor so many people. So both selfish reasons and unselfish why we wrote the book.
Wonderful. Thank you for this introduction. And I think what's amazing for me about this book, and I'll show it again, and do take some time to buy it and read it, is that you managed to interview some of the most foremost women leaders, obviously Hillary Clinton, Theresa May, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern. And these are people who don't often talk about being a woman in politics because, you know, because they're busy working and, you know, they don't have time to talk about that. So when I was reading the book, what I found really fantastic is indeed that they took the time with you to talk about the experience of the good and the bad and all these difficulties with being a woman leader. So it's your advice, your lessons, your purposes with Julia, of course, and also all of these other testimonials from incredible women leaders. So bravo. And one of the things that I wanted to start off by asking you is, when you published this, you joke that really the dream of yours was to talk about the book to an audience of men, because fundamentally, to change things, we need men to read this book as well. I got the statistic from the Alumni Association: 75% of MIT alumni are men, although I think this audience here today is closer to 50-50. But besides urging men to read this book, what else can they do to take action in helping women leaders?
Well, thank you, Alex. I think, yes, I'm often heard to say that if women want to get problems solved, they shouldn't preach only to the converted, which is other women. They should also target the men. Because if you read the book, and if men read the book, they'll see that part of the reason we need them to target them is because we need their action in several ways. It's not like that they can be passive. There are actually positive things they can do in order to help women, have a place in the workplace, have a place at the table, be able to move up the ladder. For instance, if you talk to these women early in their careers and to many other women, and it happened to me too, a lot of women say, you're at a table in a meeting, and around that table, typically, maybe there are 5 men and 1 woman, or maybe 6 or 7, you're the only woman. It's very difficult to get a word in. And when you do get a word in, nobody really captures or takes in what you say many times. And then 2 comments later, a man says exactly what you said. And everybody says, oh, how brilliant. This is what a wonderful comment, when they didn't even, when you said the same thing and no one listened. So under those circumstances, first, men can be cognizant of the woman in the room and give the person an opportunity and actually listen and lift up what the woman is saying, give the woman room. Men can do much more than that. They can be mentors. A lot of women look for women as mentors. I also encourage them to look to men. Actually, in my own professional life, quite a few of the people who mentored me or gave me opportunity were men. So there are men there who are prepared to help. Second, I think men can take a positive action by calling sexism out when they see it. It's often difficult for a woman to speak because the people think, oh, you're just trying to hide behind this excuse. But if a man sees sexism, they can call it out, and that will help with the situation. It will be more recognized. And lastly, I'd like women to take, men and women, but men to listen. How you bring up your boys will matter for the future of how they treat women. And my husband and I decided, we have 3 boys, 1 girl, that everybody was going to learn to cook at age 12. And everybody was going to learn that no one is going to be serving them. They are going to have to be an equal partner with women. So they better learn all those skills. And we tried to impart those skills from cooking, cleaning to anything else. And now I'm proud to see at least one of my boys married and doing exactly the way we said. So I'll leave it at that. A lot of lessons for men.
Oh, congratulations on the wedding and bringing up your sons in that way. Keep your questions for the audience. Keep your questions coming. I'm starting to see some of them come through. Please keep writing them. I'll refer to a few as we go along. In the book, you write something that I think is very true and important. You talk about the glass cliff phenomenon, so that women are often called upon to lead organizations when those organizations are most in peril or in doubt. I think one of the examples you use is obviously Theresa May, who had to try and sort out the UK and the United Kingdom after Brexit. So that's a good indictment. So can you tell us a little bit about the glass cliff? And also, I guess, a sort of a pointed question. Do you think that reflects your appointment to the WTO, or are are you getting an organization that is without need of any reform?
A very clever question, Alex. Yes, you know, people are usually familiar with the phenomenon of the glass ceiling. But of course, like you said, the glass cliff is when women are given a chance to lead, when things are really difficult and there's need to rescue the organization or the situation. And, you know, several of our women had glass cliff moments in their careers. I did as well. You know, Christine Lagarde, for instance, whom we interviewed, talked about her becoming the lead partner in Baker McKenzie, you know, the law firm she led. And she was doing quite well in the partnership, leading the Paris office. But, you know, there were difficulties with the firm and things were really not working. And that was the moment at which everybody turned to her and said she was the right person to lead. And she says, you know, I gave up the very comfortable Paris office that I was leading to go take this over, and was asking myself, sometimes, is this a moment of madness? But she took it on, she cleaned up the problems, and the firm continued in a good situation. So you've mentioned Theresa May, who was made the prime minister at a time when Brexit was in real difficulty, and we just saw all her struggles. And then she left, and the rest is history, tried her best. You asked me about a glass cliff moment. I've seen several in my career. It's not just one. And whether the WTO is that kind of moment, sometimes I think so. Even though I cannot say, because it was a worldwide competition, and there were also about 4 men in the competition, and 5 men and 3 women. But sometimes it really feels like a glass cliff moment because WTO is one of the most important organizations, multilaterals in the world, but it needs a lot of reform. It needs to have some wins to complete some multilateral negotiations to show its relevance to today's problems. And you have members who have been dug into positions on negotiations for a long time. So you see fishery subsidies trying to help sustainability of the oceans. It's been going on for 20 years. And people have not been able to unwind it. Agriculture, all these would benefit the world. We have a dispute settlement system that is paralyzed because one of our members doesn't think it works well. The place works by consensus. So if one member says no, then things don't work. So taking it on, people ask me, are you a bit of a masochist? And I say, maybe. I love challenges, and the WTO means so much to the world. Trade has helped lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. And the big countries who are members, the United States and China, they've seen the trade and the WTO really help their economies grow. And I think that there are many poor countries, many developing countries and emerging markets who need to benefit from the multilateral trading system. It's what it stands for fair play in trade, for stability and predictability. And I know trade has also, globalization has left some people behind in rich countries and poor countries. And we can also use this trade to lift them up. So when you look at all of this, what the WTO could be doing for people, that's my passion. That made me say, okay, it may be a glass cliff moment, but I'm going to risk that cliff. And so far, I've been 3 months in the job. I haven't yet fallen off the edge. So let's see how it goes. But it's very challenging, but it's also so energizing, trying to turn around an organization that can so help the world.
Yes, and I wish you the best of luck. And in a sense, I think you don't need luck. You have all the qualities and experience more than from going back to your PhD at MIT all the way to your work in Nigeria, to really help build a consensus around this and to really support better trade and especially for those who need it the most. So really fantastic. I have one more question on the book, and then I have already some questions from the audience. So we'll go to those after my last question on the book, and then we'll also move in a little bit to some of your roles prior to WTO. So in the book, you interview the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern. And one phrase is when you ask about how to balance it, how to balance work and life and politics and family, she replies, "I don't balance everything. I just make it work." And I'd be really interested in your thoughts on work-life balance and balance in general, because that's something that's, her statement is inspiring, but doesn't really maybe answer or might be unsustainable. So I guess the question is, can you have it all, or how do you have it all, or how do you balance things?
Well, Alex, I really love what Jacinda Ardern said. She's such an engaging leader. And you're right, she said, "I don't balance anything." When you talk about work-life balance, she says, "I just make it work." It's very difficult to talk about balance. She felt, because you always feel guilty when you're doing one thing or the other. And you feel you should be in the other place. If it's with family, you think about what you should be doing with your work, and then when you're with family and so on. So she felt you just make it work. And her trick is that she and her partner, work well together to try to make life livable and for her to be able to do her job as a leader. And of course, she has her parents who also pitch in, but mostly it's her partner who helps out. And in balancing work and life, I think what she was trying to say is that there's no perfect answer. There's no formula. If there was a formula, one could just patent and sell to every woman or man who was trying to do that. People would be billionaires by now. But I think there's certain ingredients in work-life balance that we need to talk about or think about. I'll just share my own experiences in that. The first thing I want to say is, look, whatever decision you make one that you're comfortable with. If you decide to spend your life taking care of your family, that is fine. It's a lot of work too. I spent 1 year with my children at home. I probably did a lot more work. You're never at rest. If that's what makes you comfortable, it's totally valid. And if you want to have a professional work life, because at home is work. So I want to make that very clear. There are people who think staying at home is easy. It's not. You're constantly working. But if you want to combine that with a life at other types of work, then I think you need to think of certain things ahead of time. One is, who is your partner or your spouse? How do you choose? If you know that's what you want to do with your life, don't lie to yourself. Choose someone who recognizes that your career path is important to you and it's going to be a full part of who you are. And so that they're ready for that partnership where they're going to be able to share. So it begins even before you get married or you have a partner. You have to consciously think, what do I want? Therefore, what kind of person should be in my life? And you should think about it, because if you're going to work out of the home and you have someone who doesn't really understand that or value your career, you're going to have problems all along and you have that lack of balance. So that's the first ingredient. Who is your partner? What do they believe? And secondly, at home, as much of a partnership as you can. We all know as women that no matter how hard we try, it's not always that perfect 50-50. that women end up doing more of the work. Look at what has happened in this pandemic. When children were at home, many women have left the labor force because they had to take care of their families, but at least strive towards the middle, where the man or the woman, depending, or your partner, is edging towards doing a whole lot of the parenting and the work around the home and so on. And that's the way you manage. The third thing is try to plan carefully. That's what I did. So since my job at the World Bank, most of my career involved traveling. I started to plan things with my children at a very early age. When are you going to have that performance in school, that game, which means so much to you during the semester or the term? And then we would know, because we know at the beginning of the year what the school calendar looks like. So with the 4 children, I would make sure that that one that matters so much, if it's band, they're going to be playing in the band, or they're going to have a soccer match somewhere that is so important to them, we would pick the 1 or 2, and I'd make sure I organize my travel to be there for that. And then for the others, their father would be there. So that's how we kind of planned things. Lastly, I'll just say I made a routine, because this is more for my peace of mind. Anywhere I was, I knew what my children were likely to be doing at any point in time. And I have this watch that has 5 faces. So one is always tuned to where my children are. So at any point in time, 5 o'clock, I know they're doing X, and 4 o'clock Y. So it helped me lessen my anxiety about what was going on. Anyway, enough of that, but it's just to say there's no perfect answer. You just try to get a workable arrangement.
Wonderful. I'm going to start with a couple of questions from our audience. These are unsigned. First question, what are a couple of ways that women in leadership can increase the odds that other women, presumably the ones who come after them, will be able to follow them?
Well, I think in a couple of ways. I think when you read Women and Leadership and you understand some of the challenges you might face, that would be really helpful. Sometimes I also wish I had read this book when I was younger. Because sometimes when things happen to you along your career, you get discouraged and you think I'm the only one who is going through this experience, and you hold back. And I can illustrate maybe in 1 or 2, maybe at least in one way. There are women leaders often, we have a chapter that says it's all about the hair. And what we talk about there is the fact that women leaders are judged a lot for their appearance, much more than men are, and what their hair looks like and what they're wearing looks like. And a lot of women worry about that. And when you're a leader, it's even more so, especially if you're a politician, because you're in front of the cameras all the time. Well, all our women leaders had this challenge. How do they take care of this issue of appearance? And I've spoken to many women who get daunted, who say, I don't want to struggle with this all my life, so I'm just going to go and do something else. And you can't imagine how important. Clinton, for example, calculated the number of months she spent when she was Secretary of State, just fixing, being with the hairdresser or whoever to make sure she looked right when she stepped off that plane and so on. So what did women do? They tended to devise a standard appearance that people would get used to them looking that way and would no longer be looking at what they wore, or what they looked like, rather than listening to the policy advice that they were trying to give. So if you look at some of the women, Angela Merkel today, she wears a certain style. You can see it. It doesn't really vary. She's always in a pantsuit. So is Hillary. Myself, you can look at me. I'm in my African clothes, but in a certain style. So my headgear, you can tie it in different ways in my culture, but I have a certain style. So people know I'm going to appear like this, and they listen to what I have to say. They don't look at and worry about what I'm wearing. So that was one of the things that we sort of talked about. There's another, there are other lessons, which I think when you look at them will be valuable in terms of how you plan your own leadership journey. We have another chapter or hypothesis, which we call, she's a bit of a bitch. And we really hesitated, excuse my French. We almost titled the book that way, but we thought it would be, too much. But there's this thing that women who are leaders or in leadership positions are seen as not very likable. They're often characterized in different ways. They are too strong, they're not likable, etc. And this is in contrast to the way men are judged. And as a result, women try so hard, they walk a very fine balance in trying to show leadership characteristics, which are mostly judged male-like, appearing to be a strong leader without losing the feminine characteristics they have. And it's a balancing act because they're dealing with that likability factor. And I'm sure someone like Hillary Clinton can talk to you in spades about this. So women kind of self-censor sometimes in their behavior. This takes a lot of time and thinking and so away from what you're supposed to be doing. So I think when you know that this is the case, you prepare yourself for it. But at the end of the day, women try to do this, the leaders, and then they said, look, I have to be myself. The best way I can lead is by being myself, not in trying to walk any fine line, not in trying to be who I'm not. And so I think that's a very important leadership lesson. If you're going to lead, the best way to be self-confident is lead as yourself. Don't try to copy anyone else or be someone you cannot be. Anyway, I hope those two, I could go on and on. There are 8 hypotheses in the book, but I just picked 2 to illustrate how it might be helpful to know what other women are going through.
Yes, and I really like the hair chapter and the bee chapter, and good to know that I would have appreciated a fun title, but I'm sure that that was difficult.
I'm not sure they would have published. Penguin was our first publisher in Australia. I'm not sure they would have done it.
No, fair enough, fair enough. Quite more questions from the audience, and by the way, these are really great questions, better than mine. So thank you to the audience for asking these. So when it comes to women government leaders, women have risen to the highest elected offices, such as Prime Minister or President, in countries like India, Sri Lanka, as early as the 60s. Now in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and many leadership positions in Africa, including yours. But it has been slower in the US. And you obviously mentioned Hillary a little bit. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, yes, some parts of the world, interestingly, many developing countries have been ahead in having a woman leader earlier, elected for their ability to do things and to lead. But then we shouldn't get too excited. If you look at the 193 countries that are members of the United Nations, only 57 of them have ever had women leaders. Only 21% of ministerial posts today are women. Only 1 in 4 parliamentarians worldwide are women. So while things are getting better, the pace is so slow. You find this anomaly that you just said, that in some developed countries like the United States, that is very open, has this democratic liberal image, some of these things have not happened. Just look at this. The United States is just getting its first female Secretary of the Treasury. First female secretary. So my country, Nigeria, was well ahead. when I was made finance minister years ago. And of course, we now have the first female vice president, and everybody is very excited. But you would have expected a female president in the US long ago. So we could go into a long story about why this is or is not. But I think that we've now had a good example of Kamala Harris. We've had strong women leaders in the US, and I'm convinced that eventually they will get there because they have the quality of women leaders that it takes. But men have to get convinced that, and some women, by the way, that a woman leader can be equal to the task in the US. They were able to elect a Black leader, Barack Obama. I think that we keep our fingers crossed this will happen for women.
Wonderful. A question now also from the audience. Harvard Business Review recently said that men get more actionable feedback than women in corporate environments. For example, men being told to leverage politics while women are told to cope with politics. So how can women leverage politics more? And I guess that is politics with a small p rather than
Well, you know, this is, I'm not surprised. It's interesting that, that today, only 6.6% of Fortune 500 companies CEOs are women, and only 6% of FTSE 100 companies are women. So obviously, women are still very scarce and rare at the top. And it's because of the type of advice they give. So I think my advice would be, don't wait to hear from those men how you should or should not leverage the situation or the politics. I think you have to decide from the start, what do I want to get in this organization? Do I want to be a leader? And what does it take to get there in terms of, you know, how is performance measured? What do I have to do to be a leader? What networks? You see, women are not very good at joining networks. That was the other thing we found out in the book, that men would join all these networks and, you know, be golfing somewhere and using it to meet all these people, whether they are politicians or in business. And women will be busy elsewhere. You don't hear of women leaders golfing very often. They don't have the time. So if that's not the kind of network, what other types of networks within your corporate environment can you be part of? Who are the men who want women to make progress? You know, try to find those and see if they open up to you and not to tell you what to leverage. I mean, tell you the right things to leverage and keep you away from those men who are giving you the other kind of advice. So that's what I would say to you. You have to be a self-starter. You have to take your own progress into your own hands and know that nobody is going to really, do it for you. You have to go out. And let me say one thing, you have to be a bit of a risk taker. That's what I advise many women. Sometimes we don't want to take that risk and stick our necks out. But sometimes when a situation comes in that you could leverage to another situation or position, then look at it. It might be a bit risky, but maybe if you do that assignment, it will work and get you to the next post.
Wonderful, thank you. Another question from the audience. So this is on the topic of entrepreneurship, which is really a lot what Solve is about. We know that very little funding, a tiny percentage, both in the US and across the world, goes to women-led businesses. And what can we do about that? i.e., how can funding be facilitated for women-driven businesses, especially in patriarchal societies?
Well, that's not really an easy one. to answer. And that is why many women still stay with micro, medium, and small enterprises, because they don't get access to the financing to scale up. And I think that, as I said, no easy answer. It is not something so easy to do on your own, I would say. But my advice is that these days, it may be a little bit easier. Now we're in the digital economy. We have many financial institutions online, which don't demand the orthodox things that other banks demand for collateral, because that's where women get into trouble. They want collateral, standard, property, this, that, what people who have these small and medium enterprises do not really have. And so they can't break in. So I would now look for unorthodox funding means, and they're there these days in our digital world, to be able to try and make headway. I would try to get together with other women, because sometimes when you can push in a group, you're able to access services which you're not normally able to access. I would try to push also with government, wherever you are, to see whether you can make some breakthroughs to show that women entrepreneurs are worth supporting. Join associations. Some of the women I know have joined some business associations, and through that, they've been able to get their voices heard, and they've been able to get relationships with banks and other financial organizations. So there's no one neat answer, but there are various strategies you can try. I have a few more minutes.
Wonderful. Yeah. We have 10 minutes, 15 minutes left. Keep your question coming. You might have to leave early, I'm just being told. So that is fine. Question from the audience then, and then if we have time, one more, but let's see. How can the MIT community be more supportive of your work?
Oh, that is really a nice question. I think, so I want to start by saying that the MIT community has really been very supportive of me all along. I often joke with people from Harvard that MIT, because I did my undergraduate down the street at Harvard, that MIT has been more supportive, but they don't like me saying that. I think that I would say, if you have feedback, what I'm leading, the World Trade Organization, some of you are in very strategic positions where you can look at what is it that trade can actually help do to improve business, because the World Trade Organization is also there for business to make trade more predictable. And who trades is business people. If you have feedback for me on that, what trade could do to improve inclusion, that is something very important to me. What we're seeing in the world today, the protectionism, the nationalism, comes from people who have been left behind, either because globalization in concert with technology changes did not work for them. And now, this has led to inward-looking behavior and to crises in some countries that we are not expecting. So I'm very, very, very desirous to try to work with medium, micro, and small enterprises to try to work in ways that would improve the lives of those who are marginalized. So any ideas you have in that way that could support what I'm trying to do, that would really be helpful. So those two things, feeding me with ideas, giving me feedback if things are not going well, I'm very open to that. Not just when things are going well, but when they're not going well. And obviously, if you're in a high position as an alumni, putting in a good word here and there about what we're trying to do right
Wonderful, wonderful. Do you have time for one more question about
Just one more. Yes, yeah.
Do you have one more question? Time for one more question?
Yes, I can do one last one.
One last one. It's about your dissertation at MIT. So it was entitled, or it is entitled, Credit Policy, Rural Financial Markets, and Nigeria's Agricultural Development. And I guess it providing, I'm sure you remember it fondly, but what has changed for Nigeria and I guess Africa more broadly since your dissertation? Have things changed, and are there still lessons from your dissertation that you're applying today in your role at the World Trade Organization?
Well, you know, you said that you shall remember my dissertation fondly. Maybe. I certainly remember. What I remember is writing the first chapter and taking it to my supervisors at that time, Alan Strauch, Karen Polensky, and so on, Lloyd Rodwin. And they're saying, I got this feedback. This is substandard. It's below your usual work. And that was crushing. I went home and cried for 3 days. And I felt I'm never going to be able to do this dissertation, but I had to pick myself up. And they told me, I remember Alan Stroud telling me that don't start your dissertation by writing the introduction and then the next chapter. Go and analyze all the data first. And I don't know, those were the days of SPSS. I don't know if anyone even remembers that. So I was there with this big machine doing all that. So I have some good memories of that. But I would say that some of the lessons, what I was trying to show in rural financial markets were that some hypotheses about people in rural areas needing credit were not always valid, that in fact, people in rural areas had savings that were not being mobilized, and that this could be a good source of savings. We should not always think of them in terms of credit markets, but we should also think the other way in terms of savings we could mobilize and how we could then be able to use that in the community to help them improve and scale up their livelihoods. And I think some of that's just one part of it, but it's an interesting part. It's still valid. I mean, there's still this tendency to think, oh, people in rural areas, they don't save. We don't have to worry about having any financial institutions there. It's all about credit. And then we get into credit policies that are actually detrimental. You know, government policies that give subsidizing interest rates, for example, sometimes that don't work because they don't target the people who really need the subsidies. It goes into the hands of rich people in the rural areas. So I still think it's relevant because we still haven't got it right. But I'll tell you one thing that is good that is changing. Many people in rural areas have mobile phones now. And so you can target them with government services, including transfers. And when I was finance minister, this was one of the areas I was pushing. So I tried to put some of my recommendations from my graduate degree into work and actually went some way with it. But that's a conversation for another day.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Ngozi, today, for talking to us about your new book, Women and Leadership, and also about your time, briefly about your time at MIT and your memories of it. I know you have to run a little bit early, so we're going to let you go, but thank you so much on behalf of the MIT Alumni Association and everybody here at MIT and at Solve. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. It was really fun, and I'm so sad I couldn't see the alumni. We have to do it by Zoom, but maybe another time. But I appreciate your having me. And I just want to say I love you all. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. And yes, an invitation for when we return to in-person. We would love to have you in person come to campus again. But wonderful.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for doing Solve.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And to the audience which is listening in, thank you for tuning in to this Forum for Equity broadcast. And thank you to Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala for her time today and her humor and her leadership. We have recorded this broadcast session and will make it available on the MIT Alumni Association YouTube channel within a week. If you have any feedback about today's event, do email alumnilearn@mit.edu. I'm Alex Amouyel, Executive Director of MIT Solve, and it was my pleasure to moderate this conversation. Thank you again.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.